Hello everyone, Bag here. So it's been a while since our last video analyzing the propriety of a patch's banners. Let's see, 9 months? Whatever. The banners of 3.7 are chock full of worthwhile picks. So today, we'll be sifting through every option to see what's worth your jades. And if you do end up going for any of the units on this next banner, then you can utilize the substantial discounts from the sponsor of this video, lootbar.gg. Lootbar is a site that offers discounted prices for top-ups for many different games, including Honkai Star Rail, Genshin, Wuthering Waves, Zenless, and more. To top up, all you need is your UID and region. No personal account information is required. From there, you put in your payment method, and there you go. Thanks to a combination of their base discount and coupons that I got just by logging on, I was able to save 20% off of my purchase. Now the pile of pulls for the Dahlia grows even larger. Or you could use these pulls for Cyrene, I won't judge. They even have a new special pack coming for the 3.7 banner. So if you want to know why this service has such great reviews, and why other large content creators have partnered with them as well, the link is in the description of the video. And thank you again for Lootbar for being the first ever sponsor on this channel. Let's first start with the main attraction of 3.7, Cyrene. Cyrene's pull ability has been a very hotly debated topic, as her Doom posting has been some of the most prevalent out of any unit's pre-release cycle. To me, the baseline is this. With where Cyrene is right now, practically all of her strength is tied to units who are destined to become outclassed in an unpredictably short or long period of time. After all is said and done, Cyrene is a genuinely strong teammate for most if not all Crisis Air teams, specifically for Mydei, Castorice, Ebonite, and Anoxa teams. She isn't really worth going for Aglaia over going for E1 Sunday, Aglaia, or Robin instead. For Hyacine, she's not worth going for Dot alone, but she can be worth using if you already have Cyrene for your other teams, and she's usable with Phainon if you want to avoid any RNG with core flame generation, while boasting a relatively strong showing of damage compared to other Phainon cores. I would say to watch Chewy's video on Cyrene with Phainon if you want to learn more about that pairing specifically. The number one piece of advice that is given with rerun banners is to not invest into old carries unless if you are truly committed to them. Every carry has a finite lifespan of meta relevancy, and investing late into that lifespan is just going to be worse than going for the newer and shinier option most of the time. This advice isn't 100% reliable, but it is a good general rule to go by. Cyrene then is that conundrum made into a unit. She frees up supports and improves the teams of most of the current meta teams in the game, yet due to her Crisis Air specific buffs, she is ill-equipped to remain competitive as a support for whoever the next meta DPSs end up being with 4.x. You are pulling her to prop up carries who would otherwise be replaced, so unless if you are willing to stick with that carry as power creep rises, you might be better off with either going for a more universal support or in waiting to see what kind of supports show up in 4.x. In that job of propping up Crisis Air carries, she does do a very good job, both in being a genuine boost and again in freeing up competitive supports to be used on other teams. There are some caveats to this however. For one, she usually needs a team that's tailor-made to support her and her rep-up time, so generally team flexibility is pretty stingy with her. Without Cyrene, she isn't worth it for Anoxa, without Hyacine, she isn't worth it for Mydei, and she isn't worth it for Ebonite or Castorice period until they have all their other pieces for their respective puzzles. You can't really just plop Cyrene into a Crisis Air team and leave it at that. Your starting rotations need to center around funneling her as fast as possible, and if catering to her that much isn't appealing to you, then I'll stop you right there and say that she might not be the unit for you, as that game plan is at the core of her gameplay. Overall, Cyrene is a unit whose strength right now in isolation is very different from her actual pull ability. For what she sets out to do in buffing Crisis Air teams, I would say she does a good enough job to be worth pulling for a team that can properly support her back. But with that being all she can do, she is naturally disadvantaged for whatever comes to the game 2 patches from now. This can change. Hoyoverse can really do whatever they want with her in the future. Like maybe there's a new secret Crisis Air for her to buff in the future, I don't know. But at the very least, it looks like the peak of her strength is her release, which is not really what you would want to intentionally go for when pulling a unit. With all of this talk about the Amphorius cast getting outclassed, this does depend on how fast power creep ends up rising, which if it does end up being mild in 4.x, then Cyrene will be a better pick, and regardless, you could also get her as a way to prop up your teams while we wait for the next meta to fully reveal itself, which will probably take at least a few patches. But a scenario like that is not really worth pulling an entire unit for, in my opinion at least. Her light cone is rather standard, giving some generic damage buffs that only apply after her rep-up time, as well as 6 extra speed to help her reach her 200 speed threshold, with that threshold only really being uber relevant in DDD-less teams that are very tight on her rep-up time, such as for example Hyacine-less Anoxa teams where Cyrene doesn't have DDD. I would say this light cone is generally skippable. Its damage buff is very strong, but on a given team there is usually a stronger vertical investment option to go for first. I'm more so saying that most of what Cyrene gives feels very complete at E0 S0, and her signature is just a nice bonus on top of that for the team. It's not needed at all, but it's good if you want it. I do also want to mention that Cyrene will be pullable for the entirety of 3.7, so at the very least you do have more time to both save and decide if you want to pull in the first place. Now, I do want to at least start by grouping together Hyacine and Castorice as the next units to look look at, as my base opinions on them are rather similar. Right now, the best team in the game by far is Castorice's full premium team, which is Castorice, Hyacine, Evernight, and Cyrene. So the obvious first instinct is to say that if you don't have this core, it's good to invest into. But there are two problems with that. For one, with the entire core minus Evernight rerunning at the same time, including Tribbie if you don't want to commit to Cyrene, unless if you saved a lot of pulls, you would need to spend in order to get everyone you want to fully activate this team. This is especially bad with the Lycone situation for Remembrance units, as not only are Hyacine and Castorice's Lycones incredibly strong, but in a full Remembrance team, you really don't have that many free-to-play options to pass around. Low-cost full Remembrance teams are still incredibly strong, but it's just another awkward situation that you're incentivized to pull your way out of. If you're someone like me though, and you have a few of the core pieces already, and you're looking to just add a few pieces to complete the team with what's on the banner, then while that is a very smart idea, we do arrive at another problem. With how far HP has been shilled, it's entirely possible for 4.x to turn its back on the comp, while favoring whatever new archetype they introduce instead. Think back to how break-focused so much of 2.x was, only for the archetype to completely fall off in Amphorius. HP scaling teams have a ridiculously high base strength level, but if Hoyoverse really wanted to, they could just fully screw over those who invested into this premium team, just to further incentivize those players to move on to the next gimmick. With one of the new 3.7 planar sets hinting that skill point consumption will be an important part of 4.x, maybe the lack of skill point consumption in Remembrance teams will be their downfall. The hard part is, this is all speculation. Maybe this really is a core that will withstand the test of time unlike any other team. Or maybe 4.x and onwards will do everything in its power to screw over this core. There's really no way for anyone to accurately predict this, which makes it hard to give any real solid recommendations. So with that, overall, the safer bet in gacha games is to invest into whatever's newer, as that has the capability of being shielded for longer. Castorice and Hyacine are objectively some of the strongest units in the game. They have been since their release, and with new additions they've only gotten stronger. And again, if you have an HP core that's missing one or two missing pieces, then I don't think it's a bad idea at all to finish that core off, as the return on investment for, say, giving an Evernight plus Castorice team a Hyacine is insanely high. The best way to upgrade a Castorice core is to first get Hyacine and Evernight, then get either Tribbie E1 or Cyrene, with Cyrene being better and cheaper but less impactful for the overall future of your account, and then get Castorice S1 and then Hyacine S1, with Hyacine's S1 being less impactful than Castorice's S1 for this team specifically, but it's more widely applicable as an upgrade for your account overall, especially if you play her with the likes of Jingliu, Blade, Acheron, or if you want to play Evernight as a main DPS instead. If you are a Battle Pass buyer, and you do get the Remembrance Lycones, then getting any of their signatures is a bit less important since you have more options for everyone to choose from, but the signatures are still a large damage increase nonetheless. But with all of this, just be careful with buying too much into the meta that Hoyoverse has set up, as an archetype rug pull has happened before, and it can always happen again. Castorice's core will at least be strong enough for a very long time to at least clear the other side of endgame if one side is anti-HP, and this is even true without her full premium team, as she and Evernight are both units with very high floors and high ceilings. The full premium team is just so far ahead of its competition right now, to where I just can't really say it's an outright bad idea to buy into that strength if you want, but I can almost guarantee that 4.x will not favor HP in the same way that the game has been for the past year, so fully investing into an HP core now, of all times, is going to inevitably be a weaker option compared to how smart the option has been to go for up until now. I will say, Hyacine is a strong enough generalist sustain to escape the confines of her niche, especially when paired with the vulnerability with her signature. Even without linking her to Castorice or Evernight's premium teams, she is still a top tier sustain. So if you like her and you want to use her going forward, then no, she isn't as beholden to the screwedness of her intended niche, unless if they just really push shields instead of healing or something like that. She is really contentious for the most recommendable unit here, just on raw utility alone, and while Dipped has become a strong alternative to deal with the endgame's increased damage output, she is still strong enough to be genuinely worth going for regardless. Maybe in the future they'll take sustains in the same route as recent supports, in that newer sustains will be more focused on buffing specific teams, rather than being strong through their universalness, which would then mean Hyacine would more squarely lose in more comps if her and Dipped's general dominance is individually accounted for on a team-by-team basis. For now though, she's safe, strong, and reliable, which means for most accounts I do think she is generally recommendable to pick up if you do want her. I'll make this plug to subscribe short since we already did a sponsored segment, which thanks for letting me do that by the way, as this was letting video making stay feasible for me to do like at all, but if you do like my style of content then you should stick around. Alright, back to the vid. Tribbie is kind of in her own category here, as while she is technically still a part of the HP meta, her universalness has kind of put her past that initial niche. Tribbie is a top 3 unit in the game, and she's not number 3. Her raw buffing, DDD spamming potential, and strong personal damage has made her slottable in literally every team in the game. She is the most easy unit to put on a team in their third team slot. She doesn't need energy considerations like with Robin, or mem buff uptime juggling like with RMC, she's just raw damage amp with DDD spamming. It can't really be more simple than that. If we go back to what I was saying with Cyrene, with how iffy it could be to invest into the slowly sinking ship that is the Amphoreus meta going into 4.x, Tribbie comparatively exists as a unit with an innately longer lifespan due to her sheer buffing capabilities. Even if she might not be the best in slot for future carries, I would be very surprised if she's not at least a competitive option for a long time. And for current carries, you could see her as a less committal version of Cyrene for propping up the Crisis Air carries, while not being as much of an upgrade when directly compared to Cyrene. But in return for not being as large of an upgrade, she is then not only either best in slot or very competitive for other non-Crisis Air meta teams, like with the Herta, Saber, Archer, Acheron, or Phainon, but she also has a much brighter future, which is very important for where the game is right now, as I'm sure you get by now. Now, is her being this universal unit that is generally slottable in most teams enough of a reason to pull her by itself? Maybe not, if your focus is on specifically building up carries with very specific teams, and as we touched on with Hyacine, if they do make building very specific teams more of an expectation with future carries, then Tribbie's value does go down. But if you are a horizontal investor that likes to build a lot of teams, or if you just want to better solve the problem of having 3 good teams to use for the 3 night phases of Anomaly Arbitration, then Tribbie is a very worthwhile pickup in my opinion. There is also the scenario where the next meta is less AoE focused, which would then mean Tribbie would be generally less useful for her personal damage and DDD spamming. But unlike a specific niche like HP scaling or break, AoE metas are just kind of a part of this game's identity, as there's only a certain amount of different enemy counts that they can build metas around. So even if 4.x has a single target meta, which would make it less worth to pull her, there will assuredly be an AoE meta afterwards for her to then shine in. And since supports usually have much longer lifespans than carries, it's likely that she'd still be relevant when that time comes. But if you don't want to gamble on what the next meta is shaped like, then maybe skipping here is a good idea, as her strength is at least a bit dependent on things not being purely single target. I am also obligated to call out Tribbie E1, which is by far one of the best Eidolons you can go for in the entire game, as I'm sure most of you already know. I personally got E1 Tribbie on her first rerun, meaning that I got a good amount of time to get used to E0 before upgrading, and I will say E1 did make a tangible felt difference in my clears. Not to the effect of it determining whether I clear or not, but I would still say its effect is really as cracked as it's made out to be. Do I think it's needed? No, it's not like she's bad without it, it's just a very strong upgrade on top of her base strength. Also, her light cone is rather strong, but with how great she is at spamming DDD, it feels rather iffy to recommend. It's good in a vacuum, but taking away DDD from Tribbie just feels like a waste of vertical investment over other options in my opinion. Moving on to the second half, we then have Mydei, Phainon, and Cipher. Mydei is an interesting unit, as while he has been rather unloved by the evolving meta past his release, Cyrene's release gives him a strong new core that is then very competitive. Now, like with Castorice and Hyacine, investing into Mydei by getting his entire core would be very expensive. As Cyrene gives him a serious boost, Hyacine is needed to make Cyrene fully worth it, and Mydei's light cone is also a serious boost to his performance as well. Compared to an equal level of investment into Castorice or Evanite premium teams, Mydei is just flatly less worth it in comparison. Never mind the potential anti-shilling that HP might endure in the future that he would then be swept up with. The old rerun rules apply, where going for an old carry is usually not an advisable idea, especially when the newest boost in their strength is releasing so close to their rerun. It's an expensive investment that is almost guaranteed to be less worth it than just waiting a few patches for 4.x, meaning the only way to really recommend Mydei is just if you like him and you want him to be strong. If that's the case, don't let me stop you. He's a perfectly strong unit when given his best in slot team, so if you want to invest into him, at the very least his short-term strength will not disappoint at all. And also like with what I said with Castorice, if you aren't building the core from scratch, but rather say you already have Cyrene and Hyacine and you just want to use Mydei for fun, then sure, getting him isn't a terrible idea, but I still would call it far from optimal. Phainon is in a similar yet more advantageous position. At base, Phainon's E0 S0 performance might not be worth investing into by itself, especially if he also doesn't have Ceridra. But on the flip side, Phainon's vertical investment is seriously strong, with his light cone giving him a giant boost, his E1 at least giving him a giant boost in pure fiction, and his E2 being one of the best E2s in the game. I would say, if you don't have Phainon or Ceridra, and you just want to get an E0 S0 Phainon for fun, don't expect him to be super spectacular going forward. His baseline performance will for sure be able to clear, but he's more so a unit who definitely rewards smart investment rather than being very complete at E0 S0, like Anoxa or Archer for example. Other than Ceridra, it's usually easy enough to throw together a Phainon team with cheap units like RMC or Bronya. If you need his sustain, then of course Dipped is free, and of course there's his generic premium option, aka Sunday. But even if his relatively easy to make teams is a plus, again, the scale of how worth it is to go for him tips depending on your investment level, and also how willing you are to get Ceridra for him on her next rerun. I don't mean to imply that you need E2 to make him worth it or anything like that, but if you do want him to last long term on your account, then you should at least save for a copy or two of him down the line when his next rerun is, as by then, the situation might be a bit more dire for him. And then lastly, we have Cipher. Cipher is an odd unit who is built on her universalness, while right now at least, usually being worse in that role compared to Tribbie. The teams where Cipher is actually best in slot right now are with Phainon, Acheron, and Archer. Out of those, Phainon is still very viable, but in an even worse position than most Crisis Air carries going into 4.x, and the same goes for Acheron really. And while Archer is great, Cipher isn't needed by any means to make him work. She's just by far the most comfortable and marginally best in slot option to use in the third team slot. Now, like with Tribbie, her universalness will make her very slottable in future teams, so long as universal options are, well, still universal. But there are some contingent factors for Cipher as well. Unlike Tribbie, she usually enjoys lower enemy count fights to get the most out of her ult damage and light cone debuff application, or at the very least, she wants her ult's last attack to be used on only important health bars. So if 4.x is trending to be single target, that would benefit her a good amount. Really though, the only things that would make her win out over Tribbie's DDD utility is if her specific niches end up becoming relevant to a carry again. Her once per turn follow-up attack, her uber SP positiveness, her fast debuff application, especially with a signature, or just the wonky things that you can do with her damage storing and reallocation. But until we have a new carry that actually wants one of those things, pulling for her ahead of time with the hope of that becoming a reality is at the very least a bit questionable. Cipher is an incredibly universal unit who is almost never actually best in slot on a team. So again, that can make it easier to build teams in Anomaly Arbitration, or she can free up supports to make more of a difference elsewhere. But these uses alone aren't worth gunning for when Tribbie and her E1 are right there. I wouldn't say it's a bad idea to get her, and also her light cone is a very universal better pearls that also gives a lot of speed, so that's a rather universal account upgrade as well if you want it, but I would say overall that she is rather skippable at least right now. So if it wasn't clear already, I think the looming elephant in the room that influences the viability of every unit here is the incoming meta that 4.x brings. There is just too much uncertainty with what the next world will give us, to where saying anything concrete about the future of these units feels frankly a bit disingenuous. 3.7's banners is essentially a bargain sale for everything that has defined Amphorius, and while something like the Castorice core hasn't gotten any weaker, investing into it now at the very least feels a bit unpredictable. I would say my overall safest bets for getting use out of a unit going forward would be Tribbie and her E1, Hyacine and her light cone, or Cyrene if you specifically want to preserve the Crisis Airs that she is best at supporting. Castorice's core is also generally recommendable just due to its floor and ceiling being so dominant right now in the current meta, but I don't think it's worth going for it from scratch if you have none of its pieces going into 3.7. So if you want my overall recommendation, the smartest play if you do want to pull is to maybe get one or two missing pieces of your cores if you want to rely on them as your anchors while we figure out how the future meta unfolds, assuming that you're actually interested in using the units that you're building for a longer period of time. As I said before, with how many what ifs there are for the future of Starvel's meta, the most basic advice is to save for the future and invest into what's shield next, instead of just going for reruns for what's already been strong for a long streak of patches. Take that advice as you will, I'm just some guy on the internet so don't take my word as gospel, and we'll see how valid my opinions end up being in the coming months. And that's everything. Going to the channel member corner, we have Zeka as our next new member. Thank you so much for joining, and with that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!